Today we're doing a special episode on Book of Mormon geography. We're doing something a little bit different. You can see behind us we got a green screen, and we'll be spending time with maps that help you to better understand the message of the Book of Mormon. Now before we jump in, Tyler and I would like to share just a bit of our story of how we met and how we got involved in building products to help people better engage with the scriptures. So both of us came on board at BYU. I was 2009, 2010. And when we first met, we discovered we both had this deep love, not only for the gospel, but helping more people better understand the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we had this desire to build products and tools that help people better engage. So we decided to build a group at BYU called the Virtual Scriptures Group. And we've done lots of visualizations about scriptures. And one of the things you'll be seeing today is the outcome of that group. And Tyler will tell you that it's been an enormous amount of work. Primarily Tyler. I'm mostly, been cheering him on. It's been fun to watch him do all the hard lifting. But we've been working on these maps to help people better understand what Mormon was trying to convey in witnessing of Jesus Christ and why Mormon included any geography at all as part of the message to witness that Jesus is our Savior. Now, before we jump in talking about Book of Mormon geography, it's important to know that God's chosen prophets and apostles have recently put out an official essay about Book of Mormon geography, and it's very important that all of us take the time to carefully read and review this. And Tyler and I love that the brethren have taken the time to speak on such an important matter. Now, first of all, this you can find on the church's website. We'll also include a link in our information below where you can find this. There have been a variety of proposals about where the Book of Mormon took place: North America, Central America, South America. What the brethren want us to focus on is the key message of the Book of Mormon, which is Jesus Christ. And they state this at the end of the second paragraph of this essay: although church members continue to discuss such theories today about where the Book of Mormon happened, the church's only position is that the events the Book of Mormon describes took place in the ancient Americas. And let me just conclude our introduction here with two really important statements, one from Elder Ballard, then finally from our beloved prophet, President Nelson. Elder Ballard said, "The Book of Mormon is not a textbook on topography. Speculation on the geography of the Book of Mormon may mislead instead of enlighten. Such a study can be a distraction from its divine purpose." And then this beautiful statement from President Nelson that I wholeheartedly accept. "Interesting as these matters may be, study of the Book of Mormon is most rewarding when one focuses on its primary purpose, to testify of Jesus Christ. By comparison, all of the issues are incidental." So we hope that our offering to you today about Book of Mormon maps and geography is taken in this light, that our intention is to help clarify and bring light and understanding to the Book of Mormon so that all of us can be better followers of Jesus Christ.
Okay, let's dive in. The very first thing I need to make really clear is what is an internal map versus what is a geographical model that's external in nature. Internal versus external. An internal map doesn't look at archaeology, anthropology, artifacts, ruins, linguistic studies, DNA studies, political elements. It simply looks at what does the Book of Mormon itself say about the locations that are mentioned inside of the book. So an internal map says you've got 531 pages in the Book of Mormon. You've got over 550 specific geographic references mentioned in the book. You've got multiple migrations and multiple movements of people. So what an internal map does is it says, how could I put together a relational comparison type map based on just what the book says, not based on what commentators or other scholars outside of the book, but just stick with what does the book say. Now, the danger with this is that they will use words like mountain, wilderness, borders, land, city, and whenever you're trying to make a map, you have to make a judgment call on what does a wilderness look like. Because in 1st Nephi, when they're traveling through the wilderness, we know exactly where they're going in the old world, and we can go there and look and say, oh, this is what Nephi's calling a wilderness. It's a desert. There's not a lot of that type of land in the New World, but we're using the same word wilderness and wilderness, so it leaves this ambiguity of, is it mountainous? Is it unincorporated government land that nobody's claimed yet? Is it jungle? Is it swamp? Is it, you see the problem? It can be a variety of things. And so when we make this map, an internal map, there are going to be some judgments that are or some conclusions that are drawn that may be totally off because we didn't understand what Mormon or Moroni meant when they wrote what they wrote in the book. So some people might wonder, why even do this in the first place? Why do an internal map? Why not just skip geography, since the main point of the book isn't geography? It's another testament of Jesus Christ. So why do that? Having taught in religious education for over 2 decades now, I've noticed a pattern with my students that there are some sticking points. There are some pain points when it comes to reading and understanding and engaging with the Book of Mormon. And they're pretty predictable after a while. You notice that many students struggle when we get into the Isaiah chapters. They struggle when we start talking about the various plates in the Book of Mormon. They struggle, not all of them, but it's a general pattern that many of them struggle when it comes to describing the geography and getting an image in their mind of what's going on. They struggle when the book starts talking about the house of Israel and the Abrahamic covenant, and they start to feel a little distant from it because they're confused. Human beings traditionally don't like feeling confused. They don't like feeling ignorant or feeling like they don't understand what's going on, and it can actually create feelings of distance between them and the text when they open it up and say, well, I don't know what this is saying. And so consequently, they will end up just breezing over the words because they're supposed to read from the Book of Mormon, right? If we can start to minimize those pain points and give resources to help people say, oh, wait a minute, I get this Isaiah passage, or I understand this Abrahamic covenant element here, or, I can see in my head now what's going on with the geography that's being mentioned. All of a sudden, they will engage at a deeper level with the text. Not so they gain a testimony of the geography, but so that they feel a greater connection to these real people in real settings with real problems going on around them. And in so engaging, they will now pay more attention to what they're reading and feel less confused. And all of a sudden, principles of the gospel will begin to become clearer to them, and they will be able to find the attributes and the characteristics of Christ dealing with these people more clearly, and consequently, they'll be more equipped to be able to see God dealing with them in their own life today better. That's why I started this journey 9 years ago at BYU of developing this internal map. What you're looking at right here, this is version number 42. In other words, this is an iterative process because I started with a really simple one, version 1, and then teaching noticed, oh wait, that can't be there, so I moved some things and saved it as version 2, and then I saved some other things, and before you know it, then I hired a really gifted student. I have to thank Josh Cotton for the look and the feel of what you see here. He was a brilliant illustration student who created this particular look, and then I've modified and moved things around based on multiple passes through the Book of Mormon since then. Hence, version 42. Implication is I'm already working on version 43 because as you keep going through, you realize, ooh, I need to move this a little bit over here to make a little better sense for this particular story that I had overlooked before regarding that particular geographic reference. One other thing, and then we're diving in. When you read a story like the Chronicles of Narnia, or J.R.R. Tolkien's series of The Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, you'll notice that for these authors, Tolkien and Lewis, either in the front or the back of the book, they have maps. They have a big general map of all the land, and then they'll give you some more detailed maps sometimes, zoomed in. That's what we're going to try to do here. Same thing with Narnia. Sometimes it's a beautiful colored map at the back, and sometimes it's a simple map at the beginning to give you the labels. The point isn't the map. The point is to give you an anchor point in your mind to connect the different parts of the story so that you can go on a journey, on a quest with these characters, and it makes it so that you can visualize the story better. In this case, this is fiction. In the case of the Book of Mormon, it's nonfiction. These are real people. These are real locations. And the day will come when God will reveal to us exactly where all of these locations are. But until that day comes, we're sticking with the prophets of God who say, don't fight, don't contend over differences of opinion on external geography models. We're going to stick with the internal version and stay geography neutral, but try to at least draw some attention to the relational distances and differences between these different elements in hopes that you'll be able to have a better experience in your journey through this book. So as we get ready to actually dive into some scriptures in the Book of Mormon that talk about the geographical relationships, I need to make this really clear. My job is not to attack anybody's external geographical study of where the book might have taken place. That's not what I'm trying to do. There are people who believe with all their mind and all their heart that the book took place in North America. Others believe that it took place in Baja, California. Others believe that it took place in one of 8 kind of general classifications in Mesoamerica. Others believe it took place in South America. And my job is not to point out flaws or problems or issues with any of those models. I'm simply trying to stay in the book. And by default, the idea here is that this is an internal map that shouldn't look like anywhere on the planet. Some have looked at it and said, hey, that looks like South America, this shape here. If that's the case, that was totally unintentional, and you'll see why it's shaped that way based on our first block that we're going to read in Alma 22. But the point is, you should be able to take this model. It's intended to be elastic or flexible. If you want, you can twist it onto its side or turn it onto this other side or pull it here or compress it here or push it in here and stretch it out there to fit whatever external geographical model you prefer. That's the intent of an internal map. Just make sure you keep some of these critical relational distances and comparisons between different features intact as you do your skewing and twisting and pulling it to fit whatever geographic model you prefer. So, as we have been going through the Come Follow Me curriculum this year, you've noticed we've been using this map on occasion, but now we're coming into sections of the Book of Mormon where there's a lot of movement and a lot of migration and a lot happening with these people. And rather than having that be confusing, that's the reason we're doing this special video, is to kind of orient you and give you more of a lay of the land so that geography doesn't become a distraction and it doesn't become an arguing point or a point of contention for us against anybody's external model, but simply to say, look, here is kind of what's happening in this particular chapter or this particular story as we move forward in that Come Follow Me curriculum. So initially, let me just orient you on the overall map. Up north is the land northward. It's where the Jaredite story predominantly takes place. And ironically, this story covers a much longer period of time, as well as way bigger populations than you get with the Nephites, Lamanites, and Malakites later on in the timeline. However, you'll notice we don't have very many cities listed. We don't have very many geographical features, and it's kind of cloudy and unknown up north because Mormon didn't choose to give us very much detail. Very little geographic detail up north. You'll notice the land southward is divided into two areas. You have the land of Zarahemla to the north, the land of Nephi to the south, and the land of the first inheritance to the west in the south. This is where the vast majority of the Book of Mormon takes place, is in the land southward, and you'll notice most of our geographical references come from the land of Zarahemla. That would just make sense because it's coming from Mormon, who is the captain of the Nephite armies, starting at age 15 in his 16th year, it's 15 years old, until the last battle. So for all those years, he's doing all of this movement, and then the southern parts of the land northward. Consequently, he's giving you a lot more detail and detailed descriptions of geographical references in the land of Zarahemla. Now, having said that, as you look into the south, the land of Nephi, we've put cities here. But the reality is Mormon doesn't tell us this city is 1 day journey east of this city or 3 days journey north of that. He doesn't give us any of that detail, which is interesting. You would kind of expect that. It seems that Mormon hasn't spent much time in the land of Nephi. So he knows, he's read off of the records that he has about these different places mentioned, but he's not giving us the geographical relationships. So be very careful making any judgments on our particular location of the cities in the land of Nephi, because it's a whole bunch of guesswork. Whereas when you come into the land of Zarahemla, he's a lot more detailed. And so we're a little more certain on the relational placement of those particular things. Now, let's dive in. So we've already covered a lot of stories this year in Come Follow Me, and let's take a look at where we've been so far and where we're going in the future. So we began in the New World with the entrance in the land of the first inheritance, back in the end of 1 Nephi. Then you got the great split of the Nephites and Lamanites in chapter 5 of 2 Nephi, where Nephi tells us he traveled many days' journey into the wilderness with all those who would follow him. And after many days, they founded a place, and they called it the city of Nephi and the land of Nephi. So the Nephites are going to be here in this city and land of Nephi and Shiloh and this region for about 400 years, until the Lamanite aggressions and wars become so bad that in about 200 BC, the Lord inspires King Mosiah, Benjamin's father, to leave the land of Nephi and travel northward. And the distance between Nephi and Zarahemla, based on other stories that we've covered in the Book of Mormon so far, like Limhi and Alma after Abinadi's story, tells us that it's about a 21-day or a 3-week journey to get from Nephi to Zarahemla. So that kind of gives you an idea of the distance and the spread. We also get some clues about this land of Nephi where they've first settled, in that when King Limhi's people escaped, the Lamanite soldiers who followed them northward into the wilderness, after a day, they get lost in the wilderness and they're so confused, they can't follow Limhi's group, and they also can't figure out how to get back home to Nephi, to the land of Nephi, city of Nephi rather. So the land had to be such that they were totally disoriented, and they wandered for many days until they found Emulon. So that just kind of gives you the lay of the land in the south part. So the majority of the rest of the Book of Mormon story is going to take place here in the land of Zarahemla, including that long section at the end of Alma that we're going to cover later on about the war chapters. Now let me give you some examples of where this geographical reference point, this internal map, can help us make a little better sense of those war chapters. If you turn to Alma chapter 22, verse 27, all the way over to 35, happens to be the single most densely packed in section of the entire Book of Mormon regarding geography. It's where Mormon, the abridger, pauses in his story, where he's been telling the story of Lamoni, and now in chapter 22, King Lamoni's father, and that king over all the Lamanite lands becoming converted, and he pauses to now describe some of these geographical features. So you'll notice in verse 27, where we pick this up, the king is going to send this proclamation throughout all of his land. So keep in mind, this is the land of Nephi, where the Lamanites live. Notice how he describes it here. He sent this proclamation throughout all the land amongst all his people who were in all his land, who were in all the regions round about, which was bordering even to the sea on the east and on the west. So you'll notice the land of Nephi needs to stretch from the sea on the east to the sea to the west, coast to coast. And look at its northern border. It says, it was divided from the land of Zarahemla by a narrow strip of wilderness which ran from the sea east even to the sea west, and round about on the borders of the seashore. You'll notice that this little narrow strip of wilderness, it needs to run all the way from sea to sea. Whatever that wilderness is, whether it's a mountain range, whether it's a desert, a swamp, a jungle, whatever the wilderness is, it's got to go from sea to sea, separating these two lands, okay? Notice also that it runs through the borders of Manti by the head of the river Sidon, running from the east towards the west, and thus were the Lamanites and the Nephites divided. So you'll notice Manti is always listed somewhere near that narrow strip, that dividing point. It's one of the entry points between the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla. And it's always listed, Manti always seems to be associated with the head of the river Sidon. Now, a quick word about the river Sidon. It says there at the bottom of verse 27, through the borders of Manti by the head of the river Sidon, running from the east towards the west. You could interpret the word head of the river as a confluence. In antiquity, they would do that. They would see a confluence as a head of the river, or a branching point of a river, like in the book of Genesis. After the creation, the river that came forth, and it formed a head that went into 4 different directions. So it can be a spreading out point, or it can be a beginning point, or it can be a confluence point. However you want to interpret that, totally fine. We have chosen on this particular map to depict the head of the river being the beginning point of the river flowing from the east towards the west in the region of Manti near the narrow strip of wilderness, based on this. Again, you're seeing lots of judgment calls have to be made as you're doing this, and that's all they are. They're not absolute truths. They're judgment calls. Look at verse 28. Now the more idle part of the Lamanites lived in the wilderness and dwelled in tents, and they spread through the wilderness on the west in the land of Nephi, over here, yea, and also on the west in the land of Zarahemla. So there's a wilderness on the west in Nephi and a wilderness on the west in Zarahemla. Notice also that it spreads in the borders by the seashore, and on the west of the land of Nephi, down he comes to the south again, in the place of their father's first inheritance, and thus bordering along by the seashore. So he's describing this whole western front, it seems, in this segment, where there are wildernesses, and the Lamanites are dwelling in tents there, and even down to the point of the land of the first inheritance, which seems to be on the west of the land of Nephi. Why? Because now we shift in 29 to the other side, to the east. Notice, and also there were many Lamanites on the east by the seashore, whither the Nephites had driven them. And thus the Nephites were nearly surrounded by the Lamanites. Nevertheless, the Nephites had taken possession of all the northern parts of the land. So you'll notice that the Nephites have possession of the land of Zarahemla on the north, and there's the wilderness on the west, there's a wilderness on the east, and then there's the narrow strip of wilderness that separates Zarahemla from the land of Nephi. And the Lamanites have started to fill in these wilderness areas dwelling in the tents surrounding the Nephites. kind of like a horseshoe, all the way up to the land on the north, which is bountiful. Look at verse 30. And it bordered upon the land which they called Desolation, it being so far northward that it came into the land which had been people and been destroyed by, of whose bones we have spoken, which was discovered by the people of Zarahemla, it being the place of their first landing. So it seems that the Malakites landed up north and then came into the land of Zarahemla, whereas the Nephites landed down south and then eventually ended up coming into this middle ground in the land of Zarahemla. Look at verse 31. The Malakites came from there up into the south wilderness. You'll notice we're coming from the land northward up into the south wilderness. Again, not looking at up and down being north and south orientation on a map, because they're not doing that like we do. They're looking at the lay of the land, and they're going up into the land of Zarahemla here. So picking it back up in verse 31, and they came from there up into the south wilderness. Thus the land on the northward was called Desolation. The land on the southward was called Bountiful, it being the wilderness which is filled with all manner of wild animals and other things. Look at verse 32. Now it was only the distance of a day and a half's journey for a Nephite on the line Bountiful and the land of Desolation from the east to the West Sea. Now we have to pause here for a minute because there are a variety of ways you can interpret that passage. And I'm not sure which one is the actual accurate way. So the way I've chosen to interpret it here is if you were to draw a line between Bountiful, the city, and Desolation, the city, you've got a line that's going north-south. And from anywhere on that line, it would take a Nephite a day and a half to go from the east. You'll notice he didn't say from the East Sea. It's from the line Bountiful Desolation on the east out to the West Sea. So anywhere from here out to the West Sea, it's going to take a Nephite about a day and a half to make that journey, which means the whole land doesn't have to be a day and a half's journey from the east coast to the west coast near Bountiful or Desolation. Now moving on, look at the second half of verse 32. Thus the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla were nearly surrounded by water. Hence the shape that we've chosen to use here to depict that particular phrase, that if you combine the land of Zarahemla, the land of Nephi together into what we call the land southward, it says it was nearly surrounded by water, that whole land. Hence this depiction, this shape. There being a small neck of land between the land northward and the land southward. Again, there are a lot of ways you could interpret the phrase a small neck of land. And this is one of many versions of an interpretation of that little phrase. Now, you'll notice that the Nephites have taken control of the northern part up into Bountiful and Desolation because they don't want to be completely surrounded by the Lamanites, although they are nearly surrounded by the Lamanites because of them having tents and living in these wilderness areas on the west, south, and east of the land of Zarahemla. So later on in our Book of Mormon study, we're going to see how Captain Moroni is eventually going to push all of those Lamanites out and then fortify that narrow strip of wilderness between the two. So as we take this larger map and now zoom in on where the majority of the Book of Mormon story takes place for us. Most of our stories take place in the land of Zarahemla. So we zoom in here with the narrow neck, the narrow neck on the north and the narrow strip of wilderness on the south. This is where the bulk takes place. We need to make this very clear. When the Book of Mormon refers to Zarahemla, you have to look carefully at what's going on around it. Is it referring to the land of Zarahemla, which is the northern part of the land southward, everything between the narrow neck and the narrow strip of wilderness? Or is it referring to the region of Zarahemla that's more in the central part of the land? Or is it referring to the capital city, also called Zarahemla? So you have land of Zarahemla, and the city of Zarahemla, and the regions round about. So that's where it can get a little confusing as you jump in here, is you have to keep straight these different terms that are being used. The other thing to notice is the Book of Mormon mentions 4 predominantly 4 entry points or access points between the land southward and the land northward. So the first one is over here on the east seashore. It says it's in the south, near the narrow strip of wilderness. It's called Antionum. That's where the Zoramites live. Can you see why Alma and Amulek and Zeezrom and others of his sons went on this mission to teach the Zoramites? They don't want to lose that entry point into the land north, or into the land of Zarahemla, because it's kind of a critical military position. The next entry point that gets mentioned repeatedly in the Book of Mormon is the land of Manti. So there's traffic going both directions between the two lands near Manti. The other one is over here near Antipara. You're going to get some entry points into the land of Zarahemla at Antipara. And this one is a little more difficult. It's up north. It's on the western side. Ammonihah, there's no entry point mentioned between the Nephites, the Lamanites ever coming into the city of Melech, which we're told is over west of Sidon, over against the west wilderness. And it's west of Zarahemla as well. So that's why we depict it over here, but there's never any entry point there. By the way, isn't it beautiful that when the war chapters are going to start, Captain Moroni is going to move the stripling warriors' families, the anti-Nephi Lehis, from Jershon, which is here on the east. He's going to move them over to Melech, which is the safest place for pacifists to live, because it's in the center of the land and there's no seeming entry point there. It's the safest place to keep them preserved, because this is going to be a major battlefront, and he knows that. So Ammonihah up here on the north, it's the 4th entry point that is mentioned, and it becomes pretty significant in a couple of different chapters. So those are the points. Now watch. When the war chapters begin, let me give you one demonstration of how we put the map together the way we did. So if you go to chapter 51, you're going to see that up to this point, from Alma 43 through 51, Captain Moroni has been able to defend the Nephite lands and build fortifications to the point where the Lamanites keep trying, but they're not very successful at taking over the land until we get to chapter 51. So let me give you an example of the types of exercises you go through when trying to make sense geographically. And I'll give you a really kind of an obvious example. In Alma chapter 51, verse 26, you have a Malakai who has brought his armies. Numerous hosts of the Lamanites have come in, and they've taken over the city of Moroni here on the southeast part of the lands of Nephi, because those Zoramites actually became Confederate and invited them in. And in the meantime, all of these cities that are fortified by Captain Moroni have had to have their soldiers, many of their soldiers, pulled out to come to the center of the land to fight a civil war against the kingmen who have risen up. And so it's because of internal fighting that has now opened up the door for a Malakai, the enemy, to come in and take over these strongholds. Now watch what happens in verse 26. Look at the map. Look closely as I progress here. Thus he, Malakai, went on taking possession of many cities, the city of Nephihah, the city of Lehi, the city of Morianton, the city of Omner, and the city of Gid, and the city of Mulek, all of which were on the east borders by the seashore. So you can see why it's depicted this way in a south to north orientation, going from city to city to city until he came to Mulek. And now you notice in verse 28, it came to pass that they marched to the borders of the land bountiful, driving the Nephites before them and slaying them. The whole goal of Malakai is to take over all these fortified cities and then eventually get to Bountiful so that he can now control the north, which gives him the access to the land northward, thus creating this trap all the way around the Nephites. Well, it's here in this story where Captain Moroni sends Teancum and his men up here between Bountiful and Mulek to head off that attack from Amalekai's men to prevent them from getting to Bountiful. They have an incredible battle that day, and you'll notice the wording that night they were tired. Verse 32, it was dark. Teancum had caused his men to pitch their tents in the borders of the land Bountiful, and Malakai did pitch his tents in the borders on the beach by the seashore. And after this manner were they driven. So you have this battle that took place, and now Amalekai's armies camped on the beach here on the east, and Teancum's men are camped in the borders of the land Bountiful. Not of the city Bountiful, but of the land Bountiful. And we don't know exactly how big the land Bountiful is. It could be stretched out to be much bigger than this depiction. That's fine. But Teancum's men are in the borders of Bountiful, while Amalekai's are on the beach. And it's that night when Teancum's going to go and kill Malakai. And we'll talk about that in a future Come Follow Me video when we get to there. So, why does any of this matter? You can see that for these very real people in this very real setting, the concern of, oh no, we just lost our entire eastern front. Not just our eastern front, but eastern strongholds and fortifications. And you'll notice that Captain Moroni at that point doesn't throw his hands up in desperation and give up. And he doesn't try to take back all of the cities at the same time. This is really helpful for me and for my family as we study these stories and study the Book of Mormon, to see the hand of the Lord working with these people who have lost a great deal of ground in their efforts to progress as a society. And he helps them focus on, let's reclaim and retake this ground one city at a time. So from 51 moving forward, you're going to watch Captain Moroni focus on one city at a time, beginning with Mulek and then Gid. And he's going to work his way south, pushing the enemy back out of his lands. And there's something powerful there to tie us back in to the gospel of Jesus Christ and to the strength of the Savior in helping us not just keep sin and addiction and temptation out of our lives, but how to remove it with His help, with His grace, once it's taken hold or taken root into certain parts of our character or our family as we move forward. Now, if you think it's bad to lose your whole eastern side, turn over to chapter 56 of Alma and look at 56:13. Now these are the cities of which the Lamanites have obtained possession by the shedding of the blood of so many of our valiant men. The land of Manti, and the city of Manti, and the city of Zeezrom, and the city of Cumeni, and the city of Antipara. So again, I don't know if Mormon intended for it to be depicted this way, but we know that Manti is one of the entry points. We know that Antipara is on the west as an entry point, and so I've filled in the blanks with Zeezrom and Cumeni in an east to west flow. So now, if you look at the map, we've lost our eastern seashore, our whole eastern border, and now we've also lost our southern front. We are in trouble. And so what happens is the rest of this story is how Helaman and those 2,000 stripling warriors help to reclaim these lands in the south. And we'll talk at length about one of the stories with the stripling warriors and their efforts to retake the city Antipara when we get to that chapter in the Come Follow Me curriculum. So at the ending of the war, there is this interesting migration that occurs that Mormon informs us of in Alma 63. Notice he says, it came to pass that in the 37th year of the reign of the judges, there was a large company of men, even to the amount of 5,400 men, with their wives and their children, departed out of the land of Zarahemla into the land which was northward. They're leaving. They go to the land northward, out of Zarahemla. Not only that, but verse 5 introduces you to this character in the story called Hagoth, who goes to the West Sea by the narrow neck which led into the land northward, which was on the borders of the land Bountiful. So you've noticed now, combining this story with one back in Alma 51 and 52, that the land Bountiful has a reference point to the West Sea and a reference point to the East Sea. So he builds a large ship and takes people where? They went into the land northward. It came back, he built that, or he filled it again and built other ships, and they all went northward, and they were never heard of again. So you get major migrations in Alma 63. Then you turn over to Helaman 3. Once again, you get huge numbers of people migrating out of the Nephite geopolitical central point to the land northward. Notice how it describes this. Verse 3 of chapter 3 in Helaman. It came to pass that in the 46th, yea, there was much contention and many dissensions, in the which there were an exceedingly great many who departed out of the land of Zarahemla and went forth unto the land northward to inherit the land. Now, where did they go? They didn't just go straight north. They did travel to an exceedingly great distance, insomuch that they came to large bodies of water and many rivers. And even they did spread forth into all parts of the land, into whatever part it had not been rendered desolate and without timber, because of the many inhabitants who had before inherited the land. And so they are going up and they're spreading into all parts of the land. Then the rest of the story doesn't follow them. We don't get their stories. We don't get their prophecies or their revelations if they had them. Our story in the Book of Mormon stays in the land of Zarahemla. And towards the end, then Mormon, who was living in the land northward, his dad migrated into the land southward, and there at age 15, he takes over as the chief captain, and the rest of his life is spent among the people in the land southward, in Zarahemla, and then things migrate north in preparation for the last battle into the land northward at the hill Cumorah, in the land of Cumorah, depicted here in the north. It's fascinating as you look at the whole story flow of this Book of Mormon, that there was that one part in Alma 50 and 51 where Captain Moroni sends his people to the east seashore to build up all of those cities that we lost. But as far as migrations are concerned in the book, where people are migrating away from the Book of Mormon lands where this is taking place, the geopolitical center point for the Nephite civilization, every single one of those migrations in Alma 63 and Helaman 3, they all go northward. Whether they're traveling by boat or by land, they all go northward. They don't go west, they don't go south, and they don't go east at that point. They're all headed one direction. So to conclude, brothers and sisters, the Book of Mormon is another testament of Jesus Christ. It is an instrument that was prepared by God for our day to gather the elect out of the four corners of the earth and bring them into this covenant relationship with God. This book is so good, you could spend a lifetime exploring it through a variety of lenses or using a variety of approaches. You could explore it simply for its archaeology aspects, through its weather depictions, through its political descriptions, looking at DNA studies, looking at plants, animals, metals, languages, anthropological, linguistic studies, geographical studies. But at the end of the day, I don't have a testimony of any of those things because there are so many questions that remain unanswered in each of those areas. And I do have to mention here that when it comes to questions of geography or questions of archaeology or linguistics, that there's an important distinction to remember. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So we don't know what the Lord will yet reveal concerning all of these different aspects of the Book of Mormon. He could have made it really simple, but he didn't in these cases. He doesn't want, it seems, that he doesn't want our testimony to be based on these kinds of facts and provable features. He wants us to come unto Christ because we have faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, because we trust him, even though we don't have all the answers. And that, to me, is a motivating factor for learning just enough about the geography or the linguistics or the anthropology or the archaeology to be able to better visualize, but not spend all my time focused on that element or that aspect or that lens. This is like an analogy that a dear friend and colleague of mine at BYU named Mark Wright shared with me on one occasion. If we're not careful, we will spend so much time studying these side aspects of the book that it would be kind of like coming up to a well that is filled with delicious, life-giving water. But we spend all of our time analyzing and exploring the rocks around the well, but no time drinking the water out of the well. So our invitation would be that when you open this book, that the main focus, the main attention isn't drawn to its geography or its politics or its languages or its archaeology or anthropology, but rather that you open this book to drink from the living water that it offers. So, brothers and sisters, as we move forward through this Book of Mormon year of Come Follow Me, I want to reiterate something that we focused on at the beginning out of the Gospel Topics essay. Here's the quote. Individuals may have their own opinions regarding Book of Mormon geography and other such matters about which the Lord has not spoken. However, the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles urge leaders and members not to advocate those personal theories in any setting or manner that would imply either prophetic or church support for those theories. All parties should strive to avoid contention on these matters. And then I would finish with President Nelson's statement. Interesting as all those other matters may be, study the Book of Mormon is most rewarding when one focuses on its primary purpose, to testify of Jesus Christ. By comparison, all other issues are incidental. So, brothers and sisters, I want you to know that Jesus is the Christ. And the more I read this book, the more I know that, the more I love him, the more I want to be like him, the more I see his hand guiding and shaping the people through these movements and migrations and even, yes, the wars and the defeats and the loss and the turning to him and repenting and being redeemed. The more I see it here, the more apt I am and the more my eye is focused on being able to see that same guiding, shaping, merciful hand in my life and in the life of my loved ones and my family today. I know he lives, and I know this book will bring us to him.
We hope you felt our love and enthusiasm for the Book of Mormon and the Gospel of Jesus Christ. Thank you for spending time with us, and we hope that the resources that we have shared with you encourage you to dig deeper and to seek more love from God through the Book of Mormon. We encourage you to spread light and goodness wherever you go.